scripture reading this morning, we look to the Old Testament. And I don't know if it was the state of mind I was in or not, but I had read through several different translations. And the one that made the most sense to me was from the King James Version. So for those of you who like King James, this is your day. Listen now for the word of God as it comes to us in the book of the prophet Jeremiah, the 18th chapter. The word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Arise, and go down to the potter's house, and there I will cause thee to hear my words. Then I went down to the potter's house, and behold, he wrought a work on the wheels. And the vessel that he made of clay was marred in the hand of the potter. So he made it again, another vessel, as seemed good to the potter to make it. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as this potter, saith the Lord? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. At what instant I shall speak concerning a nation, and concerning a kingdom, to pluck up and to pull down, and to destroy. If that nation against whom I have pronounced turn from their evil, I will repent of the evil that I thought to do unto them. And at what instant I shall speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to build and to plant it. If it do evil in my sight, that it obey not my voice, then I will repent of the good wherewith I said I would benefit them. Now, therefore, go to, speak to the men of Judah, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I frame evil against you, and devise a device against you. Return ye now, everyone, from this evil way, and make your ways and your doings good. My sons are reading for this morning, the Word of God for the people of God.
Jesus was at a dinner party, and as he watched the people at that dinner party jockeying for position to get the most coveted seats of honor, he declared that all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. And I would put forth the proposition that that is precisely what the Spirit of God is always at work in this world to do, to exalt those who have been brought low, whether by their own missteps or by the oppression of others, and to bring down those whose pride has become a burden to others and to themselves. The Spirit is bringing those up who are down and bringing down those whose pride has exalted them. And it's not surprising that we would hear this theme once again as we turn this week to the book of the prophet Jeremiah, because it was the work of the prophets to proclaim this very truth. Somebody said it succinctly that the prophet's job was to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And it wasn't a job that anybody particularly wanted to have. It's not an easy job. It's hard enough just to try to comfort those who are terribly afflicted and can't find hope. But it's downright dangerous to afflict those who are comfortable with themselves, who are self-satisfied, who are generally pleased with where they are and don't care about how their lives are impacting or oppressing others. It can be downright dangerous. Jeremiah ended up at one point thrown into a well because of the words he spoke. Who likes to be called out on their arrogance, their pride, their self-centeredness, their inconsideration of others, their lack of compassion? But the prophet was obliged to speak that truth, that pride cometh before a fall. It's a truth woven deep into the life of humanity. And so Jeremiah lived in a time of history in Israel where the communal values of the nation were moving in the wrong direction. It hadn't always been that way. In fact, when Jeremiah was young, the king was seeking to bring about these reforms based upon a rediscovery of the words of the book of Deuteronomy. But the king died, and his son Jehoiakim took his place. And unlike his father, this king led his land into a time of moral decay. They lost their center in God. They embraced idolatry. And idolatry is nothing other than exalting values that are not worthy of ultimate place that belongs only to God. They even were at the point of sometimes sacrificing children to these pagan gods. And so selfishness as a lifestyle was becoming acceptable. People cared more about material pleasure and comfort than they did about the plight of the poor, the widows, and the orphans, and the aliens in their land. And so God called Jeremiah to pronounce judgment on the king and his people, which didn't make Jeremiah a very popular guy. And in this particularly memorable passage, God tells Jeremiah to go down to the potter's house and to watch as the potter does his craft. It would have been a man most often in those days, for there he would find a powerful metaphor for the work of God in this world and in human life. And so Jeremiah goes down and takes note of how the potter takes a hunk of malleable, wet clay and places it on the wheel. And then as the wheel spins, he seeks to find the center and shape it with his fingers into something beautiful, something useful. But as he watched the potter and his craft, he noted that at certain points, the potter would come to the conclusion that this just wasn't working, that it's not finding the center, that it's getting warped and misshapen, and he would collapse it down into its original mass of clay sitting there on the wheel, at which point the process of reshaping the clay would begin anew. And so it was, God declares to Jeremiah regarding Israel, the form of their communal life is displeasing to me. And in due time I will render judgment, and I will bring destruction upon the land. And yet God declared there is still time for Israel to change its way. The future isn't set in stone. Fire of the clay has not hardened the clay. The people are not compelled to follow the path to destruction. They are free to change the way they live. And if they do, God will change God's mind in and decide not to bring forth the intended judgment and destruction. And so the process of the potter at this wheel is a powerful metaphor for us about both our communal life and our individual lives. And I would take note of a couple of observations. The first is there truly is a moral order knit into the universe. A moral order that was expressed first in the Ten Commandments, but more concisely expressed in Jesus. Jesus, who declared that the first commandment was to love God with all your heart. That's the true center. And to love your neighbor as yourself. There's a moral order to this universe that is that love out of which God created everything. And it is in living in harmony with that moral order, with that love with which creation is formed, that life finds its purpose, its balance. But if we transgress this order, if we lose the true center, that center we sing about every time we prepare to pray, there are dire consequences. There will be a price to pay. It's simply the way the universe and human life is designed. And there is some comfort to take when we witness people transgressing the moral order without seeming consequence, because there is an assurance here that in some way or another, these people, and in some instances I'm talking about people who have received harm directly from others, and it seemed as though they got no punishment, no consequence. We can trust that such people will eventually come to accounting. They will be brought down from their high horse. They will be humbled. We can trust them. We can let go of the concern for their punishment. And that can be a freeing thing. The second thing about this passage is to note that even as the potter is the one who is ultimately in charge, there is this clear implication that the clay, that is us, we have some choice in the matter. Will we cooperate with the intentions of the potter who seeks to shape us in a particular way, or will we choose to resist those intentions? It challenges us to recognize that we do have a freedom we often seek to avoid acknowledging regarding how we live our lives and to what extent we allow the influences of the world to carry us along in this world. We have a freedom to choose. And the third thing I would note from this metaphor is that the clay itself is affirmed as good. The misshapen clay isn't thrown into the dumpster. No, its form is broken down so that it can be reshaped into something beautiful, something useful. In every warped and misguided life, there is good stuff deep down that's been terribly misshapen. But it doesn't take away the inherent worth and the possibility of redemption. And this is good news for all of us, because all of us, I would suggest, can at times in our lives identify with broken pots when feelings of unworthiness come upon us, feeling as though we really have no enduring value to our life, and that perhaps we should be thrown into the dumpster. The metaphor of the potter's wheel brings insight, I would suggest, into those feelings of worthlessness that plague all of us. That worthlessness arises because of two things. First, we lose the true center. Our little egos, our little sense of ourselves becomes the center of the wheel. And when we revolve around our egos, everything gets warped and distorted. But you and I, we aren't up to the job of being the center. God is God and we are not. And in order to come back to a sense of our inherent worth, sometimes what it involves is a surrendering of the center place and letting go of that place where we are determined to be the judge who sits in the center and looks at ourselves and says, you are worthless. We are not the center. God is the center. We have to find the true center, or else we will be overwhelmed with feelings of worthlessness. And the second thing is that our feelings of worthlessness can arise sometimes because we have not yet discovered what it is God wants to bring out of the malleable clay that is our lives. We have not found the forms in which to serve God. We have not found and embraced our particular calling in our little piece of the universe to be an instrument, a vessel of God's love in this world. And until we find and embrace that place, we will be plagued by feelings of worthlessness. We have to let the potter shape us into that vessel that can serve the world in love. We can embrace the breaking down process, or we can harden our hearts, which is another interesting part about that. Ultimately, in the potter's shop, it's not done until the clay is placed into the fire and the clay hardens. Until that hardening that happens, the clay is malleable and there is always hope. And so when there is a perpetual pattern of hardening our hearts, that's a dangerous thing, because the malleability begins to get lost. That's why Jesus spoke often about the danger of a hardened heart. So, today is the first day of Sunday school, and we just began a week of school, and we got some teachers among us, and guidance counselors and such. And I want to try to draw a connection to this whole metaphor to this, if that's possible. And I'm going to rely upon a podcast that Justin directed my attention, an NPR podcast, which had the theme of, can kindness be taught? An interesting question. Many years ago, we adopted as one of our themes, one of our slogans, reaching out with acts of kindness. And part of the appeal of that for me was that, love can be kind of an abstraction, but kindness, we all know what that is, right? Kindness is something very tangible. You know the difference between a kind and an unkind act, and we want to be able to embody love in a very tangible way. And kindness is a word we can latch on to. So can we or can we not be kind, and can we learn to be kind? When I say there is a moral order to this universe, then ultimately that is a moral order that is love, and unless we embody kindness, we are not in tune with that moral order, and so being kind is no small thing. And one of the things the podcast talked about, which was the most perhaps surprising thing, was that there was this survey done of middle school students in which the students were asked, quite simply, what do you think? Do your parents care more about whether A, you are a success, get good grades, or B, you are kind? 80% of the students said, my parents care more that I be a success and get good grades. They polled the parents, and of course the parents were shocked. How could my kids have learned this from me? And the assumption was, pour a bunch of love into your kid and they'll just naturally become kind people. But it doesn't really seem to work that way. It's more important, often it seems, the values of the world get sort of soaked into us, into our children. How much of what is wrong in our society can be traced back to whether we've lost track ourselves about what's truly important. And so, in order for kids to learn how to be kind, there are basically Two things. Well, first, just to point out, even though in our schools today, with the recognition of the dangers of bullying and the new emphasis upon such things as kindness, I would suggest to you that there's only so much a school can do, that schools are still going to absorb that pressure that is ultimately about succeeding. So we can't look to the schools to make our kids kind. And I would suggest that's one of the reasons we're here at Sunday school and here at church, is because if we're about anything, it's about absorbing the love, the kindness of Jesus by osmosis, by teaching. And so that's a little plug here for the value of Sunday school teachers, as one comes in our door right now. That formation is crucial. But obviously, it's still going to come back to parents teaching kids how to be kind. And there are essentially two things about parents that determine whether they succeed in passing on a lifestyle of kindness. And the first might be pretty obvious. Do they model a lifestyle of kindness? And that's not just kind to the family, that's kind to strangers. Do the children see the parents care about people in tangible ways out there in the community, particularly those less fortunate? Unless they see the parents acting that out, they're not going to take that on. But the second thing they said that was important was that there needs to be an intentionality on the part of parents in those learning moments when either kindness or unkindness is lived out in the life of the child. In other words, it's not good enough to say, when Johnny takes the toy from the other kid and leaves the kid crying, to say, don't do that, give it back. Rather, there needs to be this sort of intentional taking time, stop the flow, sit down, let's talk about what just happened. How did that boy feel when he didn't had his toy taken away from him? And hopefully Johnny can reflect and say, you probably didn't feel very good. How did you tell? Well, you looked sad. In fact, he was crying a little bit. How would that feel if it happened to you? It wouldn't feel good. That's what's necessary to begin to cultivate a capacity for empathy in a child. It is part of what that potter's wheel lesson was about. It is not set in stone what is going to happen. There is a freedom of choice here, and you have to become mindful. That's a popular term, but it's an important term. It is this mindfulness about what is happening in the moment-by-moment interactions of our life. Mindful of our impact of our actions on another person. Mindful of the possibilities of what they are experiencing and what we are experiencing. Without that level of mindfulness and the parent paying attention to that experience in the moment, the child is not going to learn a lifestyle of empathy and kindness. It has to be taught with intention. And they talked about how forgiveness was really important as a part of this. And forgiveness isn't something you can just command, obviously. Tell Johnny you're sorry. That doesn't work. But once again, working through that process, what was the experience like? How did it feel from another person's point of view? How might you want to make amends? It takes time, it takes attention. And so, the thing I want to end up with here this morning is saying, we're not talking about perfection. There is no such thing among us as a perfect pot. And we will all, each of us, be undergoing this process time and again, in which the potter will be shaping us, and then in some instances it might seem like we're being broken down. But the breaking down is not the end. There is a building up. And if you're finding yourself in a place of being broken down, it is perhaps because God intends to reform you in a way that will make you a more viable vessel for God's Spirit of love. And to be mindful of that process as it is happening in your life. That the values that we are aspiring to at any given moment may not be the values that God cares about. That if God is ultimately all about love, how is the breaking of our life involving a reforming that makes us a more loving and empathetic person? At the very least, when we are broken, we know what it feels like for somebody else to be broken. But there is no such thing as perfection in being a vessel of God. We are all flawed vessels. And that brings to mind a verse from the Apostle Paul. We have this treasure that is God's glory, God's love, God's grace in earthen vessels of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. It's not about some inherent quality to us. It's about a willingness to empty out so that God can fill us with this spirit of love that the world hungers for, that the world was designed out of, that unless we mirror that love, we will ultimately find ourselves continually frustrated because our sole purpose is to be a vessel of that love. So I thought it'd be a nice way is just to sing a verse, a familiar verse. Would you put those words up there? You know this. Let's enter into prayer with this. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Melt me, mold me, fill me, use me, Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on me. Let us pray. You walk this walk with us, O Lord. You are the potter and we are the clay. You invite us to be in cooperative spirit with you as you would shape us in the image of Jesus, to walk his walk, to experience in the times of darkness, the times of being broken, the opportunity to open ourselves up to a deeper grace, a sanctifying grace that allows us to love with a love that is not ours but is yours, to be a blessing to this broken world as those who know what brokenness is ourselves, to be able to offer a sip of everlasting water to a world that is so thirsty. We ask this in Jesus' name.